Hi, it's Laura at Aquamarine18. Thanks for stopping by my channel today. Welcome or welcome back. I am here with a bit of a recap of my January 2021. I would like to chat a little bit about the decks that I've been working with the most, the books that I've read this month, my animal card of the month. I draw one every month, and just a couple of other exciting and fun things that have been going on this month for me. I've tried to do these videos in the past, and I've indeed succeeded and done a few, but it's been something that I've struggled to stick with. I really like monthly recap videos or monthly favorites that some of the channels that I subscribe to, make every month, and I always watch them because I'm just interested, in what folks are doing, and I'm always interested in hearing what people are reading and what decks they've been working with the most and things like this. So I want to do that, and I want to aspire in this new year of 2021 to actually sticking with that. I'm going to timestamp below because, I can ramble, and I did read quite a few books this month, so I don't imagine everyone will necessarily want to watch this all the way through, but I'll timestamp the best I can, and share my January with you. So without further ado, I have been working with 3 divination tools predominantly this month that I will share. In the area of Oracle, I've been working the most with Elemental Divination, a dice oracle, which is this book by Stephen Ball. I've talked about this before. I don't think I've done a full review, but this is really great. So it is premised on the interaction of different elements, and you cast the oracle in its most basic way. There are a number of different ways to work with the dice in this book, but in the most basic way, you have 3 dice. I have 2 black and a clear, and the reason that I have that is because 2 of them indicate 2 different elements that are going to be interacting with each other in the reading, and then the other one indicates which element is the stronger presence of the 2. So each reading will tell you 2 elements that are interacting, one that was present already and a new one coming in, and then whether that new element coming in is a stronger or weaker force as compared to the element that was already present. So you roll the dice, and then you go to the book, and the book has a write-up for each possible combination. The die here is a 6-sided one. So what Stephen Ball has done is make the elements fire, air, water, earth, sun, and moon, and has written up descriptions for each one. You could, if you wanted to work with, say, just fire, water, air, and earth, you could totally use a D4 instead of a D6 if you wanted to, but I quite like the system as it is, so that's what I've been using. I really like this. It's a really nice reading to start the day with. I find reading one of these, so that's one that I've been working with a lot. I have also been working with 2 tarot decks very predominantly, and they probably won't be too surprising because they're 2 of the newest decks in my collection. So one of those is the Architect's Tarot by Yusuf Bushiri, and I have a video of this deck, walking through this deck. It just went all over the table in a big mess. Okay. Good thing it's a good deck for reversals, because some of them are going to be swizzled around. It has beautiful gilding, and the Architect's Tarot is it's a really interesting deck. It was a Kickstarter that I missed, and I kicked myself for missing it, and then it finally came available for pre-order once, of course, Yusuf had filled all of the Kickstarter rewards first, and as soon as it did, I got a copy, and I just got it quite recently, and it is beautiful. It's watercolors and pen drawings. Really, really interesting deck. with some astrological associations in it, with some really interesting plays on perspective, and the architectural drawing style is really unique. There's not a lot of decks. There's no decks in my collection like this. There's no decks that I've seen that are anything like this. Really, really interesting takes on the cards. Really interesting things in a lot of the cards if you turn them upside down, and also you can make them into a panorama if you put them out side by side. It's a really interesting one. I really like this deck a lot. So I've been working with this deck maybe the most, I would say, all month. And it's got the very light color palette, right? So there's a lot of white and lighter colors, and there's something about that feels wintry to me. So I've been enjoying working with the Architect's Tarot. And the other deck I've worked with the most for tarot is it's in a nice bag, my Gaian Tarot, which I got the limited edition from Joanna Powell Colbert. Thank you very much to Marie of Ginkgo and the Crone, I think it's called, for making me this beautiful wrap style bag with dragonflies on it, which just goes with the back of the deck perfectly. It came in a kind of a meshy bag that I will use for something but is not particularly protective. And given that this is a deck that was rather pricey, I wanted something more sturdy to keep the deck in. So I ordered this bag, and Marie at Ginkgo and the Crone was kind enough to make me one big enough for this deck, which is 4 inches by 6 inches in size. So it is huge. And I love this deck. I haven't read it cover to cover, but I love the guidebook that goes with this deck so far. I used this deck most recently just for my reading at the full moon time. Full moon in Leo, and I got lots and lots of fire cards in my reading. Normally I would do something a little bit bigger, but these cards are really big, so I just did 5 cards for myself. Normally I would do maybe 6 or 8, but my table is not that big. So I've been enjoying working with the Gaian Tarot as well. Those are the decks and dice that I have been enjoying. Next is on to books. And this section of the updates, I'm going to talk about books that I finished this month. So there are some books that are ongoing, reads currently, some of which will take me a very, very long time. And there's, I think, at least one book in this pile that I actually technically started in December. Maybe only one, actually. Yeah, only one. But these are the books that I finished this past month. And I don't have hard copies of everything to show you because I do read on my Kindle very predominantly, particularly for fiction. I'm trying to both reduce the footprint of the paper being used in the books that I'm reading, and also I only have so much shelf space. I'm in need of shelf space pretty much all the time. Luckily for me, my partner is a carpenter, so bookshelves will not be a problem, but there are already quite a few in this house, so use the Kindle a lot. The Kindle is wonderful. But I have some hardcovers here as well, or hard copies, I should say, paperbacks and hardcovers. So the first book that I finished this month, and I had intended to finish it sooner, but I ended up spending a lot of time with it, that I finished very early this month, was My Grandmother's Hands, Racialized Trauma and the Pathway to Mending Our Hearts and Bodies by Resmaa Menakem. And this book, New York Times bestseller, was one that first came on my radar when it was discussed as some of the homework reading that was kind of coming out of the big panel discussion or forum. I'm not sure how we want to call that, panel or forum, maybe more like a forum, talking about racism and anti-racism and representation in tarot, hosted on Queen Aset's channel, Oya's Girl, with many, many participants in this community. There have been 2 of them now. I've watched them both and appreciated them so much. And the next is already in the day planner. So there were 2 books coming out of that as suggested homework reading, this one, and also Hood Feminism, which I did also read all of, but I read that one more quickly earlier on in 2020. This book has a lot of reflection exercises and breathing exercises and things like this. A lot of the argument of the book, I guess, has to do with, getting past thinking about racism as just an ideology, just a set of ideas that people believe that they need to be talked out of, but also something that is lived in an embodied way. And so thinking about things like ways that the body is activated into kind of fight or flight or freeze type reactions when racism is at play and things like this. Thinking about intergenerational trauma and epigenetic memory and lots of really interesting and important ideas. I did a lot of underlining. I did a lot of note taking and penciling in and things like this. And this book has given me much to think about. So that was my first finished book this month, but I read it over probably all of December and the very start of January. I might have even started it before that. It was it was one that I wanted to sit with for sure. And there were some ideas in here, particularly around this idea of getting past thinking and kind of thinking in terms of ideology, that I think are really, really important. And I have not really read anywhere else, and certainly not read anywhere else that were, put as well or as explained as well as they are in this book. So that was the first. And I put the 2 nonfictions first. Just otherwise, these are not in any kind of order. They're not in the order I read them, really, though that one was the one I finished first. The other nonfiction that I read this month, and I read all of it this month, I read Water Magic by Lilith Dorsey, which is in the Elements of Witchcraft series. And this is a series being published by Llewellyn. So I think this is the first one out, but there will be an air magic, fire magic, earth magic, all by different authors. But when I saw this, and I'm a Pisces, and I'm very much a water-oriented human, I saw this and I really wanted to pick it up. And so I read it. This is really good. It's a book I would potentially do a review of, I think, actually. I really, really enjoyed this. I will say, I read this cover to cover. It feels in a lot of sections like more of a reference book to me. So she goes over water-related sacred sites, water in different creation stories, different deities and entities and beings that are associated with or that have as their domain water in different contexts, herbs and crystals and stones and animals associated with water. And then there are also recipes, rituals, and spellcraft at the very end that have things like magical waters, baths, salts, washes, water in divination, water in dreams, water spells, and so on. So there's a lot in here, many of which I was not familiar with at all before, but have now at least had some small introduction in. And Lilith Dorsey, just reading from the back of the book here, is a practitioner of multiple magical traditions, including Afro-Caribbean, Celtic, and Native American. spirituality, and her website is lilithdorsey.com, and she has written several other books. So I hadn't read anything by Lilith Dorsey before, but I was quite happy to, and yeah, I thought that this was really great, and I will say that I really appreciated, people know what I'm going to say right here, something that I really appreciated in this book is the substantial bibliography at the end. There is a lot, you're not going to be able to see this, there's a lot of bibliography at the end. And I really appreciate that because this is very much, an overview, right? So the section on, for example, mythological watery beasts and places, there are like 2 or 3 on one page with just a little section on each. So the bibliography I feel like is particularly important for a book like this, where to work with in any meaningful way or to learn about in any kind of thorough way, you're definitely, like, this is a good book to introduce something new, but definitely will want to read more on anything that is of interest in a book like this, so I'm really grateful for that as well. I feel like the number of books I want to read has only increased from this bibliography. On to some fiction that I read. The first couple that I'm going to mention were on my Kindle, so I don't have anything to show you. I read The City in the City by China Miéville. China Miéville is an author who I really, really like. I have not read all of his work. There's quite a lot of it, including some nonfiction in the area of political philosophy, political economy. I would like to read one of his books in that area, but I haven't yet. But I have read quite a lot of his fiction. I read a trilogy called the Basleg Trilogy, and I read a book called Embassy Town, and I read an incredible novella called This Census Taker, and then I read The City in the City. So I'm a fan of China Miéville. The City in the City is it's a detective story and a police procedural kind of thing, which is not normally my style, but China Miéville, being who he is, it is not in any way a straightforward police procedural. It takes place in a pair of cities, Ulcoma and Beshel, and these two cities occupy the same physical space. So in different parts of the city, like one side of the street will be Ulcoma and one side of will be Beshel, and you're not to look at the other city if you're in one of them, right? But and so it's an idea of kind of a city or two cities with a wall between them, right? Or perhaps one city with a wall through the middle, depending on how you want to think about it. But that wall is mental, right? So, and is strictly policed and is not to be breached. And of course, with the story being a police procedural, a murder occurs that does in fact breach this barrier. So that's The City in the City. I thought it was excellent. It was not my favorite China Miéville book, but that's probably more so just because police procedural is not really my style. I am looking for, there is a BBC miniseries based on The City in the City that was made just a couple of years ago, and the trailer looks really good. It's a 4-part miniseries. I am keeping my eye out for somewhere that I can get that, because The City in the City was cool. I read Persephone Station by Stina Licht, and Persephone Station was also a science fiction book, or was a science fiction book. I wouldn't say The City in the City was at all, actually. Persephone Station was a science fiction book. It, for me, had little echoes of something like Firefly in it, for sure, in the sense of a kind of ragtag crew of folks piloting a ship together on a mission that, of course, inevitably turns out to be not exactly what they thought. And it had, what I really appreciate about Persephone Station, it had a very diverse cast of characters, including trans and non-binary representation, and predominantly female-led cast of characters, which I really liked. So that was an interesting one. It was quite fast paced, I found. Oh, then I'll get into the books I have to show you in hard copy. One of my holiday pile books, I read Black Sun by Rebecca Roanhorse, and I've read Rebecca Roanhorse before. Her more like an urban fantasy series with Trail of Lightning and Storm of Locusts, which are two books that what's it called when it's two books and not duology? Duology, there we go. There's two of them. This one, Black Sun, is going to be the start of a trilogy, but this is the only one that is out so far. This is epic fantasy on a very large scope, that comes with the list of characters and who they're affiliated with in the front, and has maps and so on. And it is very definitely based on the piece of the book here says, inspired by the civilizations of the pre-Columbian Americas and woven into a tale of celestial prophecies, political intrigue, and forbidden magic. A god will return when the earth and sky converge under the black sun. This was great. I love fantasy like this that is so absolutely not Eurocentric, which is really important. And I liked the magical elements in this book were really well developed. The perspectives were really interesting. It was a multiple perspective novel, and one of the characters in this book was a totally badass bisexual woman, and I appreciated her so much. Favorite point of view character, obviously. So I am absolutely going to read the next two. Really good. I also read from the pile is getting too tall. I also read from the holiday book pile, The Underground Railroad by Colson Whitehead. I had already read one book by Colson Whitehead, which was The Intuitionist, which I really enjoyed. This one I gave 5 stars. I review books on Goodreads. You can find, I'll put my Goodreads. You can follow me if you want to see what I think about all these books that I read. But I gave this book 5 stars, and it's a Pulitzer-winning book. Colson Whitehead has won the Pulitzer Prize twice. It would be strange to say that I enjoyed this book per se. It is a book that is about the Underground Railroad and about slavery, and the main character is a young woman who escapes slavery, and it follows her, through years of her life, and it's a difficult read. It unsurprisingly, given the subject matter, right? It's really just pervasively terrifying. This book, very atmospherically tense, without any relief at all, and it's incredible, an incredible read. Cora, who's the protagonist, is an incredible character, and also a very disturbing book. Something that's interesting about this book, and I feel like it's not really a spoiler, because it's right on the back of the book, so if you bought it, you would already know that in this book, the Underground Railroad is a physical train. So there are stations, throughout the country, and that are hidden underground, that are operated by people who, at tremendous risk, are bringing people out of slavery. The train is actually a very small part of this book. I thought that it would figure in a lot more than it did, but it was not, the physical train part was not a main part of this book at all. It was very much a narrative about slavery and escaping slavery. That was really, really excellent. The Underground Railroad. Next, I read 2 books, both of which were on my Kindle, one of which was a reread, but both were by P. Jaley Clark. The reread was a 40-page short story called A Dead Djinn in Cairo that's set in 1912, I want to say, Cairo, and it is a Cairo that is pervaded with magic and with jinn and with beings that call themselves angels, but probably aren't, and different figures like this. And The Dead Djinn in Cairo follows a detective, Agent Fatma, and she is working for the Ministry, and I'm probably going to get it wrong now that I'm thinking about it, but it's something like the Ministry of Alchemy, Enchantments, and the Supernatural or something like this, and she's investigating a case, right? A Dead Djinn in Cairo. And so I had read this story before, but I read it again, and it's great. Read A Dead Djinn in Cairo by P.J. Lee Clark. You can find it online for free. But the reason that I reread it, and this is something exciting that happened this month, is that I signed up for NetGalley and have started to review books that are forthcoming. And, I've been thinking about doing that for a long while, and I wasn't really sure, if I would ever get any books offered to me. With NetGalley, you request books that you're interested in that aren't out yet, and if you're approved, you get an e-copy and you can review it before it comes out. But I signed up, and I thought, I read a lot and I write reviews of the books that I read, why not? And I requested the forthcoming novel, A Master of Djinn by P.J. Lee Clark. And I was going to buy this book the second it came out. P.J. Lee Clark has become an author that is one who, when he publishes something, I will just get it because I know it will be good. And I was approved for A Master of Djinn, so I went back and read The Dead Djinn in Cairo, which was the first, short story. Then there's a novella kind of in the middle, The Haunting of Tramcar 015, which was a Hugo novella nominee. And then A Master of Djinn is third. You don't have to read the other two to read A Master of Djinn, but for character development, it is good, I would say. And they're all so great that you should just read them all anyway. But A Master of Djinn was so good, following Agent Fatma again, who is this amazing, dapper dressing woman who works for this, ministry investigating supernatural occurrences in 1912-13 Cairo. And so she's, navigating this job and her work and this these mysteries that she investigates, as a detective, but also navigating being in a very, very predominantly male profession as a relatively young woman, navigating her romantic relationship with another woman, and her partnership at work, like with another agent who is also a woman, for the first time having a partner in this novel. And A Dead Djinn in Cairo is the story. The Master of Djinn is the novel that is coming out by P.J. Lee Clark. So good. So good. And the representation in A Master of Djinn, and the others as well, in A Dead Djinn in Cairo as well, because the protagonist is the same there too. But representation of women and queer women, especially just in the genre of fantasy, set in Cairo. I totally teared up just because of that at one point in this novel. It is excellent. Definitely get it when it comes out. The other novel that I read that was also a arc, so a novel that is not yet out, that I just finished this morning actually and wrote a review for, was a novel called Skyward Inn by Aaliyah Whiteley. Really interesting novel. It is science fictional in that there are aliens in the story. For much of the story, the aliens are kind of a background, like that they exist, and there's one character who is a non-human character. But for much of the story, it's kind of humans had contact with those aliens, but it's not really a main point. It becomes very much the main point later on. It's hard to talk about Skyward Inn without giving spoilers, but I will say it is very much a kind of literary fiction science fiction. I feel like folks who enjoy Ursula Le Guin, and particularly enjoy Ursula Le Guin for her novels that are quite anthropological, in the sense of very different societies meeting and the contrasts between them, being explored, would really enjoy Skyward Inn as well. Very, very interesting. So check that one out when it comes out. Skyward Inn by Aaliyah Whiteley. Wow. I knew this wouldn't be short when I read this many books. So my animal of the month that I said that I would talk about a little bit, I drew an animal card at the start of the month on January 1st, and my animal of the month is the giraffe. And this card is from either Animal Allies Oracle or Animal Allies 2. I'm not sure which, because I kind of combine them. They have the same backs. So that's the giraffe. And when I'm picking an animal at the start of the month, I choose one just, I'm not in a predictive way, not like I'm going to have a giraffe-y month, like, no. But as an animal to learn about over the course of the month and to, build understandings of, that would be the kind of understandings and messages that I would associate with that animal when I am, say, doing a reading with an animal oracle deck like this one, which is the kind of animal oracle that I like in the sense that there are no keywords. It is just the animal, and the animal speaks for itself. So I always want to learn about the animal throughout the month. So this month I watched a documentary about giraffes, and I've read a little bit about giraffes, and I've learned a lot about giraffes. And so now what I think of, of course, in part I think about foresight with the giraffe, because they can see, they can see so far, and so much of their, their survival strategies and things like this have to do with being able to see a long way off, and they're very vulnerable when they have their heads down, right? So thinking about that and thinking ahead and seeing ahead, and which is interesting to think about in the context of divination, right? Looking ahead. I also learned something interesting about giraffes, which is that they are very, very adaptive, even when other species might be being adaptive in ways that are, I don't know how to say, trying to thwart them in a sense. So the giraffe, I learned in this documentary that I watched, for example, that there are trees that have kind of evolved to, sorry if you can hear Daryl, he's meowing at me. There are trees that have actually, changed over time to kind of have self-protective mechanisms against the giraffe, because the giraffe can eat so much, and the giraffe spends a lot of time eating. So different plants have developed, a strange taste to some of their leaves, or have grown long thorns as a kind of response mechanism to being totally devoured by the giraffe. But then in response, the giraffe develops thicker skin and the ability to tell which of the leaves are tasty and which ones are the ones to avoid, and just all of these really interesting mechanisms that I think are really interestingly adaptive. And as an animal, the giraffe is so much adaptive, and yet is also is very, very vulnerable. So I learned about the giraffe as endangered, which is of course really unfortunate, and some of the efforts that are happening to increase the giraffe populations and things like this. So that's how I usually work with the animal that I choose, and I'll be choosing a new animal for February, so I'll let you know which animal I choose. But giraffes are amazing, and so that was really great to spend some time learning about the giraffe. And I find particularly, with animal oracles, working with animals in this kind of way, inevitably there are some animals that I will have kind of very strong associations with, in the sense that they're animals that I see every day, right? Like squirrels, or certain kinds of birds that live in my backyard that I see every single day, and a giraffe is not one of those. So I'm always keen to spend time, reading or watching documentaries or learning about other animals that are not ones that I get to encounter in my day-to-day life, right? So it's a giraffe. A cool thing that I wanted to talk about, and I won't talk about it too much, but because we're getting towards the end, but there's a couple things that I wanted to share, that were just highlights of January. One of those is that I am taking a class, and it involves more dice for me. You may know from the colors of the dice what I might be talking about. I am taking a class on Geomancy with Kelly from The Truth in Story, Kelly Fitzgerald. So this is my book that I had printed of all of our course material, and I've got a notebook going for Geomancy, and I've been reading this book, The Art and Practice of Geomancy by John Michael Greer. I have another Geomancy book on the way that is more of a history of Geomancy, which Geomancy's history is very, very long. It involves, branching off into different contexts as Geomancy has kind of gone into different places and been carried, alongside different spiritual traditions and practices and things like this. So I'm really looking forward to learning about the Geomancy history a bit more. We did do some in the course, but learning about it more. So I'm having so much fun in the Geomancy class. If you're interested in Geomancy, I absolutely would recommend Kelly's course, which I'm doing live on Zoom, but I believe there's a pre-recorded version as well, so that you can get the videos and then work at your own pace. But it's really, really fantastic, and I'm enjoying, working on the Geomancy charts, which were very, very scary looking at the beginning, but now I'm 3 weeks in to the course and can do some preliminary casting the Geomancy. So that's been really, really great. The other little small announcement that I wanted to share, if you made it this far at the end, probably nobody will hear this announcement. I'll put it in the description box anyway, and maybe people will see it there if not. Just to keep an eye out, I'm going to be on Rachele's channel, Amethyst Ascension, for one of her channel spotlight videos, and I'm really excited about it. I've been looking forward to it. I've done almost nothing live on YouTube before. It's a little bit intimidating, but I'm really, really looking forward to it, and I really enjoy watching Rachele's interviews, and I really enjoy watching Q&As with channel creators and things like this, and I wanted to do one, and I thought, well, why not, go on Rachele's channel and do that. So that's coming up in February, so keep an eye out for that. Hopefully you can pop in live and we can chat in real time. So that's my January, summed up into a nice, short and sweet 38 minutes. Thank you so much for watching, and I will look forward to seeing you all again soon. Have a good one. Bye.